decided to focus on jobs. And the very first thing we did was to download an open source software, uploaded, put some jobs on it. And then bingo, we saw traffic on it and we felt, okay, let's continue that way.
How do I get the conviction that my idea is going to be that big an idea?
Number one is there a winner in that space? Has the space been taken? If the answer is no, maybe you have a box checked. How big is the space, right? And how big is the space is then a function of what are the trends in, say, other markets, right? Investor trends and investor, what I'll say, affinity to that space. Nigeria tends to trend with Indonesia, India, so, and maybe Vietnam, right? So we trail by, say, 5 to 7, right? So if you look at those markets and then you see a certain pattern, you can almost guess that it would play out maybe in 5 years' time. Things like this, right, help build your conviction to say, hey, if I do this well, if I hit the numbers, because of what has happened in this space, right, there's a very high chance that, we would have that happen, say, in Nigeria. And then you have to have it on the back of your mind that, hey, what if I'm wrong? I've told myself, right, that, number one, I would not let someone make a decision for me. Because when it goes wrong, I would probably not be able to blame that person. And if it goes right, I want to be able to tell myself that I made that decision and it went the right way.
Welcome to Funds and Founders. This weekly show is tailored for Austin founders navigating the early stages of their entrepreneurial journey. I'm your host and fellow Austinite, Abhinav Sinha. If you're looking for the motivation and the insight needed to build a successful company, you're in the right place. Today, we have Lekan. I've known him for 3-4 years now. Yeah. He's multiple time founder, exited a couple companies, currently the founder of Motherboard. And I'll let Lekan do a quick intro and then we'll get into it.
Hey, Abiodun, very nice to meet you again. Yeah, quick one. So my name is Lekan Olude. I started a company called Jobberman. That was sometime in 2009, exited in 2017 to Tiger Global. And then did some work for government, in Nigeria. So I'm Nigerian, by the way. Got a wife, got 2 kids. I met Abiodun in the US, and sometime between when I moved to the US, I started Motherboard that helps companies provide benefits, to their employees. Yeah, but it's nice to be on this show.
Sweet. Well, what I like to highlight on the show is just the journey, everything from how you started and why you keep going. So let's talk about Jobberman for a bit. How did you get started? Was it just you, a team, a co-founder?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, they say it's 2020, but Jobberman was essentially an idea that started while, I was back in college with 2 of my very good friends. And essentially, there was an industrial strike, an academic strike. If you're very conversant with Nigeria, you would know that, typically the lecturers go on strike every now and then for better pay, better welfare and the likes. So Jobberman was what we decided to do during that break. Unfortunately for us, we are not exactly fans of, we don't watch soccer or football, the football that has to do with Ronaldo and the likes, right? Not the American football. And we were pretty less busy at the time. And we said, hey, what can we do to just while away our time? And we figured, okay, it's either we do something in the internet space. I have a background in computer science, and so also my colleagues, but one of them has a background in medicine. So we decided to say, hey, we're going to focus either on jobs, news, right, or music. And at the time, it felt to us like jobs was something that was going to be a lifelong, long-lasting problem. And we decided to focus on jobs. And the very first thing we did was to download an open source software, uploaded, put some jobs on it. And then bingo, we saw traffic on it and we felt, okay, let's continue that way. And then we kind of just ramped up on that. 10 months down the line, someone reached out to us from Lagos and said, hey, I like what you're doing. I'd like to put in some money. And, we accepted. And when we're done with school, we decided to move to Lagos to continue with that. Somewhere in between then, I'd done some internship with Goldman Sachs. but Jobberman was what was most important, for us. And that was how we moved on to Lagos. And then, further you had...
This investor was Chika?
Yes, Chika Nwobi, yes.
Cool. Would you say initially seeing traffic is what pushed you to go all in? Or what did that step look like? Why were you guys willing to go all in on Jobberman? Because I'm assuming you didn't have revenue coming in day one. You didn't have... you were not taking big paychecks. A Goldman Sachs internship probably was a better paycheck than going in Jobberman.
Absolutely. So just to give a background, what is Jobberman for our listeners, right? So Jobberman is the largest job website in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So if you think about Indeed in the US, or you think about, ZipRecruiter in the US, then you're thinking Jobberman along those lines. So why did we decide to go ahead, right? Now I can sit down and say, hey, using this framework, using that framework. Hey, dude, man, it's all bullshit. We decided to go along because, number one, even though we had different things that was pretty much termed successful at the time, right? My co-founder, Obafemi Awolowo, already had, this pretty fledgling, web design business.
Okay.
Deji Adeomi was still in med school. I was already, even before I interned with Goldman Sachs, I had a satellite network, side business going on. So I was installing satellite networks across the country, satellite dishes rather, across the country. But Jobberman felt like something that, you could, we're seeing, immediate impact. That's number one. Number two, it felt like something we could compete in favorably, considering the fact that internet and internet businesses was just at its early stage at the time, right? So we had what I would call the unfair advantage of us being computer science students, being in the game early, and seeing a lot of what I would call interest, in other countries, like in India. I remember, Naukri and Monster in India were two websites that we were very religious on. They probably must have been seeing a lot of traffic from Nigeria. I'm like, hey, people looking for Indian jobs, not knowing that it was probably, a couple of us just trying to understand what was going on in that job board. But traffic was one, but we saw a clear, should I say, future in terms of how the internet industry was going to shape out, right? And we wanted to be entrepreneurs. We already had some sort of entrepreneurial flair, and it was just a combination of that effort and that dream that just got us focused on Jobberman.
Why did you decide to take the money, the investment? Because a lot of early stage founders are very hesitant to dilute, and they want VC money, but they don't want to dilute. They want to own the company. What was the reason for?
I mean, in simple terms, right? It's like essentially you needed to grow. You weren't revenue generating at the point. Even if you were revenue generating, you weren't profitable, right? So and you are cash strapped, right? I wasn't earning well within Jobberman, and so also were the other co-founders. And it just made sense for us to kind of get something where we could pump into the business and hire other people into the business. So it just made sense for us, to get in an investor to help drive the growth. And at the end of the day, like everybody says, 1% of $1 billion is better than, 100% of $1 million, for example.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, makes sense. And did all three co-founders shut down their side businesses when you all decided to go in on Jobberman, or?
That's a very good question, actually. So we continued Jobberman with our side businesses, right? I was essentially still, traveling back and forth to Goldman in London when Jobberman was in the first couple of years, I would say maybe in the first 2 years. And my other partner also still had his side business going. There was another company called Ugo Host, was an hosting business that was also going. And I remember our investor sitting us down and saying, hey guys, you need to kill those businesses, right? And because we needed to focus, and maybe this would, help me also highlight one of the key things when it comes to entrepreneurship, right? Which is that concentrated focus on something. And at the time when he said you need to shut it down, it felt like it was just, speaking crap, right? But thankfully we said, no, we're not going to shut it down. And then decided to kind of get someone else in to run the business, right? So, we found someone, gave some sort of a share swap, we shared and then handed the business over to them, and then they started running the business, and then we focused, squarely on Jobberman. Yeah. So did we have that conversation? Yes, we did. Did we shut it down? No.
How do you think your trajectories would have been different? Because I'm assuming all of you are making money in your side businesses, right? And I feel like early entrepreneurs make a lot of decisions based on where cash flow is coming from and where there is potential to make money. I've seen a lot of early entrepreneurs decide to open up an agency on the side and make money because while I'm working on this idea here, let me make money by, building a website for someone here, which is, again, concentrated focus. Was money coming in here a better mental state to be in so you could better focus on building Jobberman? Because you're probably not taking a salary. You're probably not withdrawing money right now from Jobberman.
I mean, when you consider this question that you've asked, right, you also need to put in perspective as to what state of your life were you at that point in time.
Yeah.
At that time, we had just, got out of school. We had a couple of years to fool around, right? Before, the reality starts to eat, and then, parents start to say, hey, I'm not going to fund you, right? That's one. Two was the fact that we had made what I would call significant capital that we could burn on, almost such that if we said, you know what, we want to focus on one thing, we still had enough money, to live on, runway for a couple of, I'd say a year or two, right? Now, if you take that and then you bring it to, say, now that I have 2 kids, right, I might not be able to make that kind of a decision like I made the other time, right? Because I need to pay school fees and the likes, right? So today, when founders do that, right, a couple of things that I would put in perspective would be, number one, what is the future play, right? Do you see, are you so confident that you're on the path to something major? That's number one. And then number two, do you have what I would say runway, to be able to take this company to, some crazy levels and then raise on the back of that? If you have those, I would say, you know what, just crash your whole focus on that single thing.
But then how do you get that conviction? Now that Jobberman is the largest job board.
Yes.
But at that point, did you know it would become the largest job board? You had a conviction that internet business would have been the space to be in.
Yes.
But did you know that would have been the thing to pick up, right? What I'm trying to ask is, how does someone know this is the industry, this is the idea, because I know how big a market is. I know how big an idea can be. How do I get the conviction that my idea is going to be that big an idea?
Okay, so there are a couple of things, right? Number one is there a winner in that space? Has the space been taken? Right. If the answer is
irrespective of country and market.
Irrespective of country and market, right? If the answer is no, maybe you have a box checked. How big is the space, right? And how big is the space is then a function of what are the trends in, say, other markets, right? Investor trends and investor, what I'll say, affinity to that space. Nigeria tends to trend with Indonesia, India, so, and maybe Vietnam, right? So we trail by, say, 5 to 7 years, right? So if you look at those markets and then you see a certain pattern, you can almost guess that it would play out maybe in 5 years' time. So this, some things like this, right, help build your conviction to say, hey, if I do this well, if I hit the numbers, because of what has happened in this space, right, there's a very high chance that, we would have that happen, say, in Nigeria. Can you be absolutely right? No. Right.
But they're indicators. They're indicators.
Indicators. And then you have to have it on the back of your mind that, hey, what if I'm wrong? Right. And very, very early on in childhood, I've told myself, right, that number one, I would not let someone make a decision for me, because when it goes wrong, I would probably not be able to blame that person. Right. And if it goes right, I want to be able to tell myself that I made that decision and it went the right way. So, yeah, so you just need a little bit of conviction, do a little bit of an analysis. Things can go wrong, but hey, that will help.
So Jobberman was roughly 8-year journey.
Yep.
From 2009 to 17. At any point in that journey, what was one of the highest points besides the exit? Was there a key moment you faced that was like, oh, like something that stands out?
Yeah, a couple of things, actually. One was when we hit 1 million users. Okay. I mean, now, people ramp up like pretty quickly. So, internet penetration is high, mobile penetration is high and all those things. But when we hit 1 million users was one. Second was when we hit product market fit.
Okay. Quick sidebar. How do you define product market fit?
So product market fit is when, number one, you have a sweet spot where, your buyer is willing to pay. And then, you see a lot of ramp up without essentially forcing your users to sign up, right? So you've gotten to that point where you now have that multiplier effect where, candidates just wanted to use your platform. And then companies were willing to, cough out some money, right? To use your services. And at that point in time, it wasn't so bad, unlike before then, when, we would say, hey, my name is Lekan, I'm calling from Jobberman. Can you post your job? And then the next question is, are you scam, for example? Or, why would you want to take my job and post it on your platform for free? Like all those questions were pretty much there. I think some other highlights that kind of came up was when we had a mention from Mark Zuckerberg saying, hey, what, the Jobberman guys in Nigeria are doing is, something awesome. And they're like, yeah, and at the time, Facebook was a couple of billions in users. And, it seems like, we're on.
Nice mention.
Yep. Nice mention. Absolutely.
Pretty cool. I'm guessing with highs, there also come lows in the journey. What are one or two lows that stand out?
Lows, I think one of the lows that, that stands or that stood out in my memory was 2015 during the credit crisis. Again, because jobs is just it's quite a leading indicator as to how the economy, performs. So we do a lot of, relationship with the government. And then we were beginning to see that companies were either reducing their workforce or, we're hiring, we're reducing the quantity of hires, or we're pausing their roles and the likes. And for us, we felt that we needed to make a decision internally. And we decided to, cut the staff size by, I think, about 50% or thereabout, between 40 and 50%. I think that was one decision that made me, like in what I would say in African context, when they say you're now a man, I would say that was one of the things that defined me as a man, like looking into the eyes of half of your workforce and telling them that, dude, you have to go. Not because you're not performing, but because we need to survive. Yeah, that was quite a very, very low moment.
Was that your first layoffs?
I lay off a lot of time. I was the CEO, right? So I was driving the business, growing into that.
But that was your first mass layoff?
Mass layoff, absolutely.
That was financial driven and not
performance driven, absolutely. And that was the only one.
Yeah. Really. You're not the reason. You're a number on a spreadsheet, and you just were below the line, not above the line, right? If you never come to peace with that, you'll start thinking everything you did over the last however long you were there. Mm-hmm. Maybe I could have done that different. Mm-hmm. But your effort is best spent in figuring out your next steps. Why decide to sell? How did that come onto the table? Was that something pre-planned? Were you planning for years like, hey, we're prepping to sell? Or was it just, hey, we got an offer, let's figure it out?
I remember we sat down, the three of us, and we asked ourselves, like, hey, what are we building here, right? Are we building a company that is going to outlive us? The answer is yes. But are we building a mom and pop shop? Or are we building to sell? And one of the things we told ourselves was, yes, we're building to sell, right? But we want to build a brand that would outlive us, right? And that was, part of, the whole strategy. So at the onset, as a founder, you need to ask yourself that question, because if you don't, the decisions that you make on a daily basis would determine, what your exit strategy, looks like. So it's always been on the table. Thankfully, we've had, initial investors, Tiger Global, Seek, being initial investors. So they were clearly part of the bucket of investors that we could, offload it, to at the time. And then when it got to 2017, right, we felt we had gotten to that point in time. We, the founders, felt we had gotten to that point in time. We broached the conversation. Of course, there was going to be like a shock if the three of us left, at the same time. So we talked about the numbers. The numbers made sense. And then, we had also an agreement that we're going to leave in batches, let me put it that way. So two of us left almost immediately at the same time, sometime around December, actually, just thinking about it, considering that we were recording this on December. And then the last founder left, I think 2 years after, just to ensure that the shock was not as impactful as, yeah.
What was the first thing you did after the exit? Did you take a break? Did you chill for a bit?
Yeah, I did. I took a break, traveled to London, went, maybe for like 3 or 4 months, got pretty boring quickly. And because there was nothing to do, I decided to start another company. And this was like an outsourcing, like a, business process outsourcing company. I got pretty tired of that quickly. And then that coincided with my ask to join government. So I got, again, a CEO, did some equity release to the CEO, and then, handed it over and then moved into government. But yes, I didn't spend so much time just sitting down and enjoying life.
Would you say there was ever a point in this journey where there was some notion of burnout, where you're doing too much, there's being pulled in too many directions, or do you just like to keep going?
Yeah, definitely. There's also a time when, even right in the middle while Jobberman was running, you always have that burnout. And even outside Jobberman, off Jobberman, the other businesses that I tried to do, yes, I had those instances of burnout. A couple of things. One, because again, you underestimate the power of having co-founders, and maybe 3 co-founders. That's the 3 co-founders. Number one, 3 co-founders seem to be like the perfect number to have. When you have to, when you have a deadlock, it's very hard to kind of navigate how to solve for that. But when you have 3, you probably would have 2, on one side, and then maybe you on the other side or something. So that's one. The second one is while you're running the first business and then you exited, there's something called the founder's hubris, that you might feel like, anything I lay my hands on, was going to work, right? So if you're not careful, you begin to lay your hands on like 3 or 4 things at the same time. And then you quickly realize that the concentrated focus that you had in the first year, on the first gig, is one of the most important things that actually drove you to that standpoint, and not just, 4 or 5 things, running 4 or 5 things at the same time. So yeah, burnout, happened. There were times when, I just shut down for like 2 weeks, wasn't taking calls, was extremely burnt out. But again, what keeps me going, and I think what keeps a lot of people going, is number one, understanding that hey, I've got 100 years, right? I can experiment as much as I do, right? Even if I fail, even if I lose all the money, right? As long as I have my brain and I have my sanity, I can always come back, right? Once I have that settled in my mind, the rest is history.
Has that ideology changed before family, after one kid, after two kids? Or has that sort of been a constant throughout? Because I feel like I resonate with that. I also feel the same way, but I feel like I don't have kids, right? But if I have a kid, I feel like I would be a little worried to be like, oh, let me crash and burn and pick back up because I have to provide for a kid. But I don't know if that fundamental has changed.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you how I think now. During the lives of the Jobberman episode, right? It was really, I got married somewhere in between. But while I was unmarried, it was like, hey, if I crash and burn now, I could immediately get a job anywhere, right? The experience I have, having dealt with C-level, is just way above my peers. That's one. Number two was I could start something else, right? On the back of the fact of the performance to that point in time, definitely would get someone else to back me. When I got married and had a kid, the first thing I said was, hey, if I fail, I'm just going to be a kid, the second kid to my wife, right? So if she works, fantastic. Now, consider the fact that I was in a country like Nigeria, very, very entrepreneurial country, 200 million people, a lot of energy, but there was something that was missing, right? Nigeria does not have a social safety net.
Yeah.
What that meant was I have to figure out a way to provide and create a safety net for myself. So after my first kid, the very first thing I wanted to move to, right, was to preserve the little wealth that I had. So wealth preservation. So I started working towards wealth preservation, got to the point where I felt that I was good enough, where if everything goes to moot, give or take, even if I die, right, my kids and my family is safe. Yeah. Then moving to the US, one of the best countries in the world.
Arguably.
Again, there's a systemic safety net of some sort, right? Then you have also preserved your wealth. And then you have a ton of opportunities, right? Where you could fail today, start tomorrow, start a career today, start another career tomorrow. You just have options and opportunities over and over again. That also has given me quite a lot of confidence to say, hey, I have my family, kind of sorted for, many years if I can't do anything, whether it's through insurance, whether it's through real cash.
So that's not a concern.
It's not a concern anymore. And with that, I am essentially like the liability.
Yeah.
Right. Just, having fun and for the...
There's more worry of you burning everything than...
Absolutely. For the rest of my 60 years.
What keeps you going? What keeps you wanting to start a business and keep building something new? Why not just stay at home with your kids and not even job? Why not just stay at home with your kids and play with them, work with them, help them grow?
The two things, actually. One is I love to solve problems.
Okay.
Right. So when I see problems like, hey, let's just give it a shot. Let's try it out. The essence of solving the problem is not as essentially to make money. It's just to like, hey, there's a problem here, right? The convenience of the world around us just doesn't make sense, right? Let us try and fix this problem, right? So that's the first thing. The second one is I feel I have this calling, and I can go back into the story and tell you where I picked that calling from, that if I don't build businesses, some people are going to suffer. So I have this compelling responsibility to come up with ideas and take that risk so that people that essentially cannot take that risk but can create value, can add value, can have something to come to work to every day and potentially be able to feed their family.
Are you talking about creating employment? Are you talking about providing value to the customers, or both, or a little bit of everything?
I mean, it's both, right? How do you, if I were to create employment, for example, I need to provide value to the customer. The customer has to pay me. And essentially, I need to get people to deliver that value to the customer, and then, you have that cycle, right? So, but for me, at the end of the day, right, it is actually creating, it almost starts first from trying to solve a problem, but also then trying to look at the hundreds of people that work for me and then say, hey, you know what? As long as we do the right thing, you can be rest assured that I'm going to almost guarantee that you have a job and your family is happy and you're stable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. How do you pick ideas? How do you go into the problem solving and business building?
Would I say I'm a guru at that? I would say no. Because every time I, tend to maybe listen to
Because we've talked about a lot of ideas and shut down a lot of ideas.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's been market size, it's just been viability, logistics, a lot of reasons why we've been like, hey, this doesn't seem feasible, right? But
yes, I mean, so very first thing is, market sizing, is very important. That's one. Two is the fact that all the components to make that idea work available today, right? And, you have situations where you have this, but you just don't have that company that can create this to make yours work, right? So you have to kind of pack that idea. It doesn't mean that idea is a stupid idea. It just means that maybe it's too early in its day. And then thirdly is also one of the things I look at is also the, your own ecosystem. What kind of things make, get you going? You go into ideas that are retailish, do you like ideas that are do you like B2C, things that will get you, pumped up, and the likes. If I pick an idea that I do not like, I wouldn't put my all into it. And at the end of the day, it's just going to be flat on the line. Yeah. So there are quite a lot of what I would call reasons. If you were to ask me, right, where I think I need to kind of put a little bit more time is to be a little bit more futuristic in my ideas, to say, hey, how do I place a bet that in the next 5 to 10 years, right, this is where the world would be. And then how do I move towards that direction and go wait for the world there? I think I need to do a little bit of that.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I feel like everyone's thinking about AI ideas right now, but I feel like it's a little too late for that. Like, if you were thinking about AI 4 or 5 years ago, you're now riding the wave.
Absolutely.
But now it's probably something, I don't know what it is right now, right? But you can't be building core AI stuff anymore. You're now building tools.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but
yeah, I agree with you. Like playing in the US market, where you have like the best entrepreneurs, and you're you're ahead of the pack globally. It's a tougher one, right? It's easier when you are in a developing country, or you are in a country that looks up to the US, for example. You can essentially trend and say, hey, if this is happening, or this has happened 5 years and hasn't gotten to this country, there's a likelihood that will happen here. But in the US, you have to you almost have to play God, for lack of a better word.
How do you define being an entrepreneur?
I think at the end of the day, being an entrepreneur is creating value out of something that has zero value today. So combining things, it could be combining things from two industries. It could be two things from the same industry. It could be it's almost like hydrogen has its own value. Oxygen has its own value. But the combination of hydrogen and oxygen creates water. Same thing as salt, right? So it's really so much around how do you look at an opportunity? How do you see a problem? How do you take constituent parts, combine it together, create a pricing around it, and create value out of it? Whether you do that out of desperation to survive, or whether you do that because you want to go IPO, I think the motives are essentially, secondary. I think if you can do that, then you have what I would call entrepreneurial tendencies.
Like that. Very well phrased. Very well phrased. What made you start Motherboard? What did you see? What made you start it? And were there any, how do I want to say this? Hesitations before you started it? Or was it very clear when you saw the problem, you're like, oh no, I gotta go do this?
So Motherboard wasn't, like I would say, an idea that was like very clear. Was there hesitations? Yes, like any other idea that you might ever have. There would be an hesitation, but there would be that strong, I don't know, conviction, whether it's data backs or whether you just felt you had something in your mind that would drive you, right? And I started Motherboard because I realized, and this is within the African economy, I'm essentially very African focused.
Quick 2-minute explanation on what Motherboard is for people who don't
Okay,
know.
so Motherboard basically helps, employers, right, manage their benefits, to employees. So basically today, the relationship between employer-employee in terms of disseminating the benefits is broken, right? The person that enjoys that broken connection is the merchant, right? So you have an employer, say, give $1,000 per month for healthcare, for example, to the employee, right? But the employee cannot leverage that because the employee is in certain locations, or the employee does not even have, maybe the abilities to be able to access, those benefits, right? And the employer still gets to pay, right? So there's a lot of money that kind of goes down the drain in that relationship, right? And because of my background from jobs, having been pro employee, in that sense, Motherboard felt like a solution where I could say, you know what, I could fine tune that relationship a lot better, right? Where companies could actually have what I would call a floating, should I say, budget for their employees, and employees can tap into that budget, and companies still tend to keep their money, and employees that don't use the money, have policies that are defined by the company, whether you keep it or the money returns back to the company, and we've essentially done that across different types of benefit, from healthcare to food to energy across Nigeria.
Nice. So how did you enter the space, and how did you go about building this company? Yeah.
So, again, just spending some time and, just talking again about, concentrated effort, you get to a point in time when you begin to ask yourself, like, your being and your accumulation of knowledge over time, what's your space? And quickly, it was very clear to me that my space was within, jobs, people, labor, benefits, and that world. So that's why it's, have an outsourcing company.
Solo founder, co-founder?
No, co-founder, right. And that was my space. So it was very easy for me to kind of just concentrate within that space, leverage, what I would call the relationships and,
industry knowledge.
And the industry knowledge I've had, to start up Motherboard.
Yeah. And just for context, right, I want people listening to get an idea of, hey, if they're early in their journey, how should they better make decisions? How should they better decide, hey, should I go with idea A or B or C, right? Just for how do I decide what to go and what to do?
Okay. Say you have idea A, B, C, like maybe 5 ideas. The first thing that you probably want to ask yourself, most especially if you have some experience, is in what industry do you have, like a strong knowledge? And hold on that. And let me tie that back to a single, phrase called unfair advantage. Now, where do you have an unfair advantage? And in having an unfair advantage, you it's a combination of which industry do you have like immense unlimited knowledge about?
Yeah.
What skill do you have? You know, by the time you combine it with that industry knowledge, sets you apart, you know, in that industry. Do you have something that can make you the number one or the number two in that industry? And what is the size of that industry also? Again, size is also very, very relative to the market size, right? So if you talk about Nigeria, for example, that is a $400 billion GDP sized market, and compare it with Houston, for example, that is like a 450 billion, right? So Houston is just tiny, well, small, you know, and it's almost relative to the same size as a country, right? So you need to look at that market and say, hey, this is where I want to cover, right? What is the size of that market there? And when you can understand that, then you can understand that, number one, your unfair advantage would play in that same market, right? So what is the total addressable market and what is the market that you can win to become, you know, number one? If you cannot clearly show that, then you'll probably be a mid-sized business within that space. Right. And it then depends on what you also want as an entrepreneur. Do you want to be number one? Do you want to be number two? Number one or number two? Or do you want to be a mid-sized business player, a player, you know, in that space?
Makes sense. What's one problem you're trying to tackle with Motherboard right now? Or whatever is most top of mind for you?
I think one of the biggest problems I'm trying to tackle is how to remove the friction of payment for users that do not have a bank account.
Okay.
So Motherboard delivers benefits to
end users.
Just about 10% of the workforce, right, in Nigeria.
Cash heavy.
You know, so yeah, it's 90% cash heavy, 10% have a bank account. So a lot of things, you know, happens through cash. And with cash means that you can track, with cash means that there's a lot of, you know, loose ends and the likes, right? And Motherboard runs on what I would call almost like Auto in Mexico, runs on a voucher infrastructure. And for me is how can I make that voucher infrastructure the means of payment for people that do not have a bank account, do not have a bank close to them, and still want to be able to get their benefits wherever they are in Africa, right? Wherever they are in the country. That is my biggest headache now.
So it's both a distribution problem plus a centralized voucher creation problem. And there's no network you can piggyback off of currently.
So, yeah. So, you know, we talked about, you know, like what are the infrastructures that you have? Yeah, there are a couple of networks, but they're very expensive. And because they are also very early, right, it's so hard to piggyback on them because all the value that you're trying to create is eroded because they are also still very early stage. But it's worked in a couple of other countries before. So, hey, you know.
Yeah, I've told you about UPI in India.
Yeah.
So only if, I feel like that's been a really good innovation that's been government led, built by private contractors, TCS, Infosys and stuff, but government initiated. They're almost no one quote me on the numbers, but they're like 1/3 the size of Visa, MasterCard, doing trillions in transactions. But government enforced, so now everyone has to use it. And but no, I get that problem. Couple last questions. So one thing I like to ask everyone is, what are 3 books or resources that have helped you a lot that you think would be helpful for anyone listening in their entrepreneurial journey? A resource could be an article, a blog, a podcast, anything.
I think the very first thing for an entrepreneur, or any human being, to be honest, is to set the foundation of your worth. of your mind. Because a lot of the things you're going to do would operate at the mind level, right? Before you actually express it out. And I think one of the best books that I've listened to, because I listened to it, is How to Hone Your Mind by Napoleon Hill.
Okay. I'll get the info from you later. Yeah.
It's a very, 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 very good book. Essentially talks about how do you move from poverty to success, basically. The next thing is trying to understand how you can use people to create success, right? And the book I would recommend is Teams of Teams, written by, forgotten, it's an Army general in the US, and essentially how Navy SEALs work, to get there.
That Jocko Willett? No,
I don't think so. Yeah, I can always check it out. And then the third one is really understanding how to build a company. Today, we're in these times when, I would say maybe a couple, like 2 years ago, where everything is just scaled so fast, burning a lot of cash. And then we've gotten into the year 2023 when things have just kind of cooled down and companies are just falling off the sky.
Money's not easily available.
It's not as available. And it just takes me back to that book, Good to Great, and what's the other sequel? Great by Choice. And essentially just speaks to how you can consistently grow as a business. Even if you're growing at 20% month on month, just ensure that it's something you grow consistently. And then you can weather the storm for as long as, time, as long as you don't have any other external factor. Those would be the 3 books that come to mind.
And the last thing is, what's your startup stack or tech stack? So what do you use on a day-to-day to run your live company? An example is Notion, QuickBooks, Evernote, whatever. What's your stack?
I'm a Google guy. Google Docs, I'm a Google guy. All my companies, you have Slack and the likes coming later in the day.
Yeah.
But from Jobberman up to date, it's Google all the way.
Okay.
Right.
So everything Google.
As much as possible, Google, maybe outside the cloud. I use AWS, I use Slack. Personally, right, in terms of my, kind of just gauging my life, working on my life, I use Evernote. Okay. I don't use Notion, but I use Evernote.
Google Docs, Google Drive.
Google Docs.
Nice. Simple. Keep it simple, stupid.
Nice.
So
if you ask me, right, I kind of sit somewhere between Google and Amazon for the best part.
Nice. Sweet. Where can people listening find you? What's the best place to
I think the best place to find me is on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn.
Yes. Yeah, it's on LinkedIn. Yes, you can also find me on Twitter, but I would respond.
I don't think I've ever seen your Twitter. But thanks, Lekan, for coming on and
for this session. Very, interested.
Sweet. Thanks for tuning into Funds and Founders. If you're a local Austin founder, a venture capitalist, or just someone who's building and in the middle of their journey and would like to be featured on an upcoming episode, submit your guest pitch to abhinavsinha.podcast@gmail.com. If you have a founder-specific event you'd like to promote on the podcast, you can also reach out to me. If you want to continue to get support through your founder journey, hit the follow button and I'll see you in the next episode.